Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 21st of August, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information right here at weather.gov/Alaska. Once you go there, you'll be able to find easy links to your local weather forecast, radar and satellite pictures, as well as observations around your part of Alaska. And if flooding is a concern, weather.gov/APRFC, or Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center for short, is a great way to check on the flood stages or perhaps river flow information around your part of Alaska. One place to check on today would be Cordova, where a flood advisory is in effect. That has now been extended into 5 p.m. Wednesday afternoon because of the heavy rain that's pretty much locked on target right now for Cordova. This stream of moisture has been moving up out of the subtropics, and while it is a thin area on the satellite picture that you'll see in a minute, it's a very concentrated area of moisture, and rainfall amounts in the last 24 hours alone have been over 3 inches so far. We expect at least another inch on top of that, and places like Eak Lake have been seeing a tremendous amount of water fill in there, as well as areas, streams, creeks, and rivers have been coming up. Now, it's not the only place. If you go up the Denali Highway over the McLaren River, water's pretty close to Bankful there as well, and streams and creeks in that area will be running pretty high, and we expect to see more rises as we go into Wednesday and Thursday before that starts to move out of the areas. So if you are traveling anywhere along the Glen Highway, the Denali Highway, north and east of Prince William Sound, expect to run into some pretty wet areas, and if the rivers are close to the roads, you're probably going to see at least some minor impacts there, and we'd love to know about it. Pictures are great, calls are wonderful. Please do let us know because that certainly helps us do a better job of reporting that information to everyone else and keeping you safe. Now, as far as wet weather goes, the other side of that is, where is it not raining? In some places that are still a little bit on the drier side for now, up around the upper Yukon Valley, around Fort Yukon, there's still at least some elevated area of fire danger, but most places are seeing some very large-scale improvement that should continue really the rest of the fall here. It looks like fire season is probably just about done, but always be careful with fire. One other place to keep an eye on, at least for the next probably 24 hours or so, would be northern parts of southeast. But after we get this next round of rain into your area, looks like fire season will be pretty much shut down. We'll wait for the official word from the Alaska Fire Service folks there, and they'll give us the thumbs up. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture, and you can see this trail of moisture that's working its way into the northern parts of Prince William Sound. We've got a weak area of low pressure here, but it's just enough to bring in a substantial flow of moisture out of the subtropics. A little bit better view here across the infrared picture, and you can see that moisture just being slammed into the Chugach Range. Out west across the Bering Sea, low pressure continues to churn. It's going to deepen a little bit more as we get into the next 24 hours, but mostly what you're going to notice here is lower ceilings and a little bit more widespread stratus there. The bulk of the precipitation that we're going to see over the next 24 hours will probably be focused across northern parts of Prince William Sound and to the east, working into the northern Gulf, and then up into the upper and eastern sections of the interior. Now, this next wave of low pressure will be spreading some rainfall in across the west coast, and that will be the next challenge as we go ahead through the rest of the week, is how far east does that spread. Here's a look at the weather map for today. High pressure is still kind of protecting central and southern parts of southeast. You've got a dry couple days, but that is slowly filling in. The heaviest rainfall across the Prince William Sound region is starting to spread eastward, and that fire hose is going to become a little more diffuse. So instead of really focusing on that one spot, it's going to start to fan out a little bit more. So that's good news, and that flow will be broken up a little bit. So the big effect of rainfall that we've seen across Prince William Sound probably won't be as concentrated as it moves into southeast. But low pressure is in charge of that, and as that's tracking to the north and east, you'll find that also moving its way slowly toward Yakutat as it's fanning out. Now, we do have some wet weather that's been passing into the interior. That's been fairly widespread, and tonight that should continue. Areas of fog should be expected as well. One thing you'll notice if you're traveling up and down the Seward Highway, or into the Sterling Highway down toward Homer, you're going to notice probably more fog tonight. Very wet atmosphere there, and in the wake of this rainfall, as that starts to wind down, probably watch for visibility to go down as well. So be prepared for some changes there. Out across Southwest, showers extend all the way through the Kuskokwim Bay and into Southwest and Bristol Bay. Yukon Delta region, all looking at some areas of wet weather today. Low pressure out across the Bering at 994 millibars will keep things unsettled there as the front moves in across the Aleutians and into the Alaska Peninsula. Expect the winds to change. Small craft advisories should be expected across most of the Gulf, it looks like, including the outer coast of southeast. Probably some strong winds up around the Skagway region as low pressure is working to your north and east at about 1,004 millibars. That'll be for your Wednesday. Showers are fairly widespread across southeast, it looks like, for the midweek, and also across the interior for the west coast, Norton Sound, Nome, all the way up toward Kotzebue. In and out shower activity there. It looks like areas of fog should be a little more widespread across the north slope too. And remember, you're looking at more of a northeasterly flow here as high pressure sitting up across the Arctic. It's moving some of the ice around, but certainly pushing in cold weather up against the Brooks Range. And that's the reason it looks fairly dry right there. But again, there will be a lot of stratus and fog in the region. As we get into Thursday, low pressure has moved inland now into the upper Tanana Valley, and it's still fairly unsettled. It is possible that we'll see widely scattered areas of shower and thunderstorm activity as far north as the Fort Yukon region to Eagle, south and west toward the McKinley Park area, and then eastward as we get into Northway and maybe Chicken and Tote. For southeast, showers still look to be a part of your day for Thursday. A wave of low pressure is working in across the western Gulf, and you can see more of a west to easterly flow here setting up. Once that passes, that should help to break up some of the clouds and the rainfall for Kodiak. You'll notice showers across southwest, Bristol Bay, once again all the way through the YK and into the upper Kuskokwim Valley. McGrath, you're looking at shower activity, as well as Galena, Huslia, out toward the west, Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, as weak areas of low pressure continue to sit pretty much in the same place. Out west, another wave here west of St. Paul and St. George. And then you look out toward the bottom part of your screen there, that is yet another disturbance. They're just lined up, and we will continue to see waves of rain, at least for the foreseeable future, as we get into at least next week there. So hope for some sunny breaks where you are if you need that. Here's a look at the forecast temperatures in the morning. Mid to upper 50s for many parts of southeast, south central, upper 40s and lower 50s there. Milder weather all the way up through Galena and the Koyukuk Valley, lower 50s for Norton Sound. 49 around Tin City and Wales. For the north slope, lower 30s there all the way out toward Kaktovik, 42 in Fort Yukon, 51 in Kodiak, and mid-40s for the Aleutian Chain. As we get into high temperatures for your Wednesday, still fairly mild for central and southern parts of southeast. You can start to see the impacts of that wetter weather around Yakutat, 58 there. 50s and 60s for Prince William Sound. A little bit warmer for parts of the Cook Inlet region, low to mid-60s for you. 54 for Fort Yukon, 30s for the North Slope. Nome, you're looking at 58. And southwest, look for high temperatures in the upper 50s to lower 60s around Bristol Bay. For Thursday morning, it's cool there. Areas of fog around the North Slope, 32 in Kaktovik, 33 around Utqiagvik. South and western temperatures in the upper 40s and lower 50s. Prince William Sound temps in the upper 40s there, with southeast still in the lower 50s. And the chain, the Alaska Peninsula region, closer to that 50-degree mark with high temperatures on Thursday, not changing much, closing in on 60 for Bristol Bay, 61 in Fairbanks, 38 around Utqiagvik, and southeast temperatures in the upper 50s and lower 60s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to your flying weather now for Wednesday morning. IFR conditions will start to spread out a little bit more across parts of southeastern Alaska as that moisture plume is very narrow. It will be pushing a lot of moisture, though, up against some of the higher terrain in southeast. Look for widespread MVFR across the Gulf. IFR across some of the higher terrain of the Chugach. Hit and miss across south central with still a fairly broad focus for IFR conditions from St. Matthew all the way down to St. Paul, St. George, Unalaska, Nikolsky, and out towards Sand Point. The North Slope was looking at IFR conditions across most of the coastal plain, but that should improve as we get into the afternoon on Wednesday. IFR conditions just north of Point Barrow and eastward, just about toward Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, not quite. Look for spotty IFR conditions across most of the Bering Sea. MVFR will be the major issue there, as well as for many locations across southwest and into the southern half of the interior. South Central should see improving conditions for Wednesday afternoon, so if you have to fly around the Cook Inlet region, Kenai Peninsula, Seward, into parts of western Prince William Sound, and maybe even eastern sections, you're going to see a window of opportunity here that you may not have later on in the week. IFR conditions south of Kodiak from AKwx all the way out towards Sand Point, and you'll notice conditions improve across southeast for Wednesday afternoon, at least in part. Now for Thursday morning, look for MVFR conditions fairly widespread again across the Gulf, the Bering Sea, south and west, all the way into the North Slope. Kobuk and Noatak valleys included. IFR will once again be found across some of the higher terrain and parts of the western Gulf into the North Pacific, and then hit and miss across a large part of the Bering. As we get into the afternoon for Thursday, widespread MVFR will be back. That does include the Cook Inlet region there, though you may see some breaks around Chillicothe Strait. MVFR conditions fairly widespread across southeast. IFR is back around the Chugach all the way down through Resurrection Bay and into the western Gulf, and also across parts of the Alaska Range, and still hovering just along the North Slopes coastline there, as well as Point Barrow and just south. And just south into the coastal plain, though, VFR conditions are expected. Let's take a look at your past conditions. As we get into your Wednesday, IFR conditions are expected around Anaktuvik, with some improvement through the afternoon. Similar effects are expected there around Adigan Pass. A slow and low start there for Adigan, with some improvements during the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see likely holding an IFR certainly through the morning. Some improvements may be noted in the afternoon, but right now it looks like there's a better chance that both passes will be listed at IFR tomorrow afternoon. Maybe some improvements around Rainy Pass in the afternoon after an IFR start. Same goes for Windy Pass. Instrument flight rule to get you started there on Wednesday. Some improvements there, but probably not as much around Isabel. IFR conditions most of the day. Mentasta Pass may also start at IFR, and it looks like there will be some quick improvements to MVFR and maybe a slight chance for VFR if things continue to improve in that direction. Tanita Pass perhaps improving to MVFR conditions by Wednesday. Portage Pass, like we saw on the charts a minute ago, VFR is certainly possible by the afternoon, and that could spread eastward into the rest of Prince William Sound, at least at lower terrain levels there. So some hope. Chilkoot and White Pass also starting out at IFR with some improvements noted by the afternoon. Freezing levels indicate that cool pool of air is not quite as warm as it once was, but you can see the cool weather spreading out across the Bering Sea, all the way across the southern Bering, and across south central. Levels here at or below 8,000 feet, but there's certainly plenty of warm, wet air to be had. 8, 10, and 12,000 foot levels across southern parts of southeast. Significant cool gradient dropping southward across the eastern, north slope, and the interior. Levels here start at 2,000 feet. Go all the way up to 8,000 feet around Eagle and the Yukon Valley. Surface freezing line right around the north slope. As we get into the icing potential, there certainly is a lot of moisture and a lot of cool air there, but it's still trying to hold on to summertime. Levels are at or above 10,000 feet for just about all of our significant icing concerns. So isolated moderate, but at or about 10,000 feet for areas around the upper Yukon Valley to the north slope and out across the Bering, and including areas in the north and eastern Gulf Coast, so probably no significant concerns for lower level flying. Our jet stream has several waves here. The main players right now are the low pressure centers that are coming in from the west, and each one of these is digging, allowing that next round of moisture to build in and strengthen all the way down into the subtropical levels. At 9,000 feet, you can see that southwesterly flow coming into south central, more of a westerly flow coming into southeast, light winds across the interior, and an easterly flow across the north slope. As we get into Wednesday at 3,000 feet, a broad easterly flow, 15 to 20 there. Southwesterlies across the west slope and the west coast in Bristol Bay, and more of a westerly flow coming across the Gulf into southeastern Alaska. So turbulence concerns below 8,000 feet across the upper Yukon, some chop across the north slope, and below 4,000 feet for the Aleutians and southwest.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time, compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Now on to your update for sea ice on this 21st of August. We're noticing the higher concentrations of ice still lingering across the central and eastern Beaufort seacoast, and some of that is just within miles there of the Kaktovik coastline, so very close to the coast and probably even closer. Marginal ice is even closer than that, and you can see that exists all the way up toward Utqiagvik and north and west. Not a whole lot of changes in the last day or so, but we also didn't get a very good view of the ice from satellite's perspective today. So a little bit of caution with this. As always, you can check out the very latest at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. Check on sea surface temperatures as well as thickness and concentration maps that are able to be manipulated by you and saved off if you need to. Here's a look at southeast now. As the wind comes up a little bit more for the Skagway area, expect winds up to 20 knots with 4-foot seas from the south. North and westerlies in the Clarence Strait region, 3-foot seas expected there. An onshore flow all the way up and down the outer coast, 15 knots with about 6 to 7-foot seas there for your Wednesday. By Thursday, the winds and the seas subside ever so slightly. About 6 to 7-foot seas in most areas will continue. West and northwesterly flow developing south of Port Alexander and Sitka into the Dixon entrance. Northwesterly strengthen inside of the Clarence Strait, 20 knots and 4-foot seas. There's southerlies up north for the Lynn Canal, 4-foot seas expected there for Thursday. South central, we expect a westerly flow inside of Prince William Sound. South and westerly winds across the north and western Gulf through the Barren Islands, about 5 to 6-foot seas or so. Southwesterlies coming up Cook Inlet too. 15 to 20 knots. That should bring in some drier air though, so you'll slowly start to chip away at the cloud cover in the region. Winds down to about 10 to 15 knots as we get into Thursday. Light easterly flow inside of Prince William Sound as things start to dry out there. 10 to 15 knot winds for the north and western Gulf, looking at 5-foot seas on Thursday. For Bristol Bay, southerlies 15 knots and 4-foot seas. Down the Bering Sea coast, expect 25 knot winds with an 8-foot sea. South and westerly winds continue up through Kodiak Island, 20 knots and 6 to 7-foot seas there on your Wednesday. For Thursday, we expect 15 to 20 knots in most areas. Still looking at about 6 to 7-foot seas south and east of Kodiak Island, all the way through Perryville and back toward Falls Pass. The Bering Sea coast, 7-foot seas a little bit further out as you get into Bristol Bay. Looks like seas will hold around 4 feet there with 15 knot winds coming in from the south and west. For Wednesday, look for slightly higher winds, 20 to 25 knots in most areas. Looking at a little bit more of a westerly flow west of Kiska, 11-foot seas there, 8 to 9-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast, 9 to 10-foot seas in most areas along the Pacific for your Wednesday. That strong southwesterly fetch eases up just a little bit more as we get into the central and eastern chain for Thursday. 20 knots in most areas, 15 knots way out west of Kiska, 7-foot seas for you with 7 to 9-foot seas for the Pacific coast, and you're looking at about 8-foot seas from Nikolsky to Unalaska on that southwest flow for your Thursday. For the west coast, light winds from the south and west into Norton Sound, 2-foot seas expected there. Easterlies wrapping into low pressure out across the central and western Bering Sea. You'll get southerly winds around St. Paul and St. George as a result. South and easterly winds for the Kuskokwim Delta region, 7-foot seas closer to the coastline there. Seas subside just a little bit there around the Kuskokwim, 15 knots, and 5-foot seas for Thursday. Light winds around Norton Sound and south of St. Lawrence Island. You'll get a stronger southwesterly flow, though, for St. Paul and St. George, and easterlies around St. Matthew with 7-foot seas there. Easterlies still over the ice around Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik. 20 knots expected over the Beaufort. You'll see a slightly stronger flow across the Chukchi, 25 to 30 knots, and an easterly wind coming off of the Seward Peninsula with a 6-foot sea. For Thursday, not a big change for the Beaufort at all. 20 to 25 knots expected there. About 7-foot seas coming down past Wainwright to Cape Lisburne, and east and northeasterly winds pulling into low pressure across the western and central Bering. Look for 3 to 4-foot seas there through the Bering Strait and around St. Lawrence Island again on Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, it's still raining around Prince William Sound. Cordova and the areas surrounding it has a flood advisory now until 5 o'clock on Wednesday. That's been lengthened just a little bit more. That fire hose of heavy rain is going to fan out a little bit more across southeast as we go into the next couple days, but it is going to rain a lot more in many more places here. As a result of some of this very concentrated rainfall, in the last 24 hours or so, the Cordova area has seen more than 3 inches of rain. That doesn't sound like a lot for areas around Prince William Sound, but because it's so concentrated, places like Eyak Lake are seeing some significant water rises in the region. Look for areas of showers and fog north of a stationary boundary, north of the Alaska Range. That includes most of the central and eastern sections of the interior. Another wave of low pressure is going to sit out in the Bering Sea for most of the week. It is helping to drag in new disturbances, though, from the North Pacific, and you can see one of those there in the bottom part of your screen. That will reinforce a wetter weather pattern after a brief break for South Central and a chance of showers and storms in the eastern interior. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.